2:17 a.m., Greenwich Mean Time, the geopolitical landscape shifted. Following a massive Iranian ballistic missile strike targeting multiple strategic coordinates in Israel, the United States Department of War initiated a global combat alert. Across every military district, from the continental United States to overseas territories, the signal for immediate readiness was issued. This was not a regional containment effort. It was the activation of a full-scale strategic bridge. The order was absolute, zero margin for delay.
Keep advancing, no quarter, no mercy for our enemies.
The massive machine of American logistics, dormant only hours before, was now operating at peak capacity. By 3 a.m., the first phase of the deployment began. In Marine barracks across the East Coast, transport buses arrived with engines idling. There were no briefings, no detailed explanations, only the immediate execution of pre-established boarding protocols. Marines moved in disciplined silence, carrying serialized gear and adjusting tactical straps as they climbed the ramps. At the primary departure airfields, the C-17 Globemaster III fleet stood ready on the tarmac. Rear ramps lowered, internal lights dim, these massive transporters were prepared for heavy lift operations. As the personnel arrived, the second phase, the logistics chain kicked into high gear. Cargo handlers and loadmasters coordinated with surgical precision. Forklifts moved between staging areas, transporting heavy-duty pallets. Flatbed carts rolled across the concrete with mechanical consistency. The inventory was extensive. Portable power generators, high-capacity ammunition crates, encrypted communication arrays, and critical medical supplies. Every item was scanned, logged, and secured within the cargo bay. This was the first leg of a complex flight plan. These aircraft were scheduled for a midpoint stop at a strategic European hub to consolidate personnel before crossing into the Middle East at maximum fuel capacity. Simultaneously, at specialized heavy-lift bases, the loading of mechanized units began. Armored tactical vehicles, including MRAPs and heavy-duty logistics trucks, were driven up the steep ramps. Ground crews used standardized hand signals under the glare of industrial floodlights to guide every inch of the movement. Steel chains were ratcheted down to the deck, securing thousands of tons of armor against the turbulence of high-altitude flight. The hum of diesel engines filled the hangars, mixing with the smell of JP-8 exhaust. At a separate combat airfield, the focus shifted to air superiority. Maintenance crews initiated a 24-hour surge, preparing fighter squadrons for sustained offensive operations. Every airframe underwent a mandatory Tier 1 inspection. Panels were stripped, avionics suites were recalibrated, and radar arrays were tested for electronic interference. Wiring harnesses were inspected panel by panel to ensure zero failure during high-G maneuvers. These were not routine patrols. These aircraft were being configured for deep strike missions over hostile territory. Phase 3. The arming sequence. Ordnance teams moved with practiced efficiency. Air-to-air missiles were lifted onto wingtip rails using specialized hydraulic hoists. Heavy guided bombs, JDAMs, and paveways were mounted onto underwing pylons and locked into place. Every electrical connection was verified through a digital data link to the cockpit computers. Red-tagged arming pins were inserted, serving as the final visual confirmation of a hot weapon. These pins would remain in place until the moment of taxi, a grim reminder of the mission's lethality. Inside the hangars, the final human element was finalized. Soldiers, stripped of civilian comforts, packed their rucksacks with meticulous care. Every kit included a standard rotation of uniforms, reinforced boots, and long-term sustainment supplies. This was an indefinite deployment. There was no rotation schedule, no defined return date, and no civilian contact. The geopolitical clock had been reset to zero. At dusk, the final boarding command was broadcast. Soldiers formed into rigid columns, moving toward the waiting fleet of C-17s. One by one, the ramps hissed shut as the hydraulic seals engaged. The sound of 4 massive turbofan engines spooling up signaled the end of the staging phase. One after another, the transporters taxied to the active runway and lifted into the darkening sky, disappearing into the transatlantic corridor. 12 hours later, on a high-security desert tarmac in the Middle East, the first aircraft touched down. The ramp dropped before the turbines had even stopped spinning. Soldiers filed out into the dry heat. Vehicles were unchained and driven straight into their tactical positions. Forklifts cleared cargo pallets in minutes, not hours. These aircraft were on a hot turn schedule. Every 24 hours, the flight plan was reset. 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 Every 24 hours, They would refuel immediately and return to the United States to ferry the next wave of reinforcements. The activity on the forward base was relentless. Fighter jets were marshaled into reinforced shelters. Fuel trucks connected high-pressure nozzles to the single-point refueling ports on the aircraft fuselages. Thousands of gallons of JP-8 kerosene flowed into the tanks, monitored by digital gauges to ensure a perfect balance. Once the tanks were sealed, the ordnance teams took over, repeating the arming sequence for the next sortie. Fuel, weapons, airframe, avionics, engines, the cycle was unbreakable. By the time the pilots entered the hardened briefing rooms to receive their target coordinates, the airfield was transformed. Every jet on that ramp was fueled, armed, and cleared for combat. The buildup was over, the mission had begun, and somewhere beyond the dark horizon, the targets were already locked.